G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with a tale of 3 air compressors. On the right hand side, brand spanking new, cost me $25, but its retail price would have probably been around about $35. It's a 250 pounds per square inch 12 volt mini air compressor. Pretty much a direct component for component remake, slightly redesigned version of the one that I paid $34.80 for in 2003. And over here we have the ancestral mystery bag, which came to me via my mother's car's toolbox, which she's now too old to play with, and I'm pretty sure she got this from her boyfriend, and by the looks of it, he and or his labourers, farm labourers, have had a go at trying to fix it. I've had a go at trying to fix it, and today's probably going to be my last attempt. Whereas these newbies are more or less functionally identical, and they represent a stylised air compressor, complete with a gauge that rapidly becomes dysfunctional. And this one's had a leaking hose repaired. As you can see, removal of 3 simple screws shows you the mechanism, to wit, a 12 volt DC electric motor driving a 10-to-1 reduction gearbox, and that driven gear then drives the counterweighted crankshaft, whose big end, for want of a better word, drives the connecting rod, as can be seen in this view. And there on top, what we have is a captive ball bearing, which will, as the piston goes down, permit air to go into the cylinder, and when the piston comes back up, that little ball bearing, pushed by a spring, prevents air from emerging out here, and the air has to come out to the T-piece and, in theory, onto the gauge as well. So that's the tried, tested, time-worn, been going for at least 15 years version of how to build a mini air compressor. This one is finally being replaced because it's seen so much service that it's lost the rubber out of its eccentric cam-based compression connection, which fits onto the valve housing on your car tyre or onto your fire extinguisher. And search my Sunfoil project video for solar powered fire extinguisher to see more about that venerable bit of equipment. And the sad fact of global market forces means that it's actually cheaper and easier and simpler to replace the 14-year-old unit rather than it is to replace the hose on the 14-year-old unit, especially considering that the gauge hasn't worked for years and I've already had to repair the hose on it several times previously. So let's have a little bit of a look at what's in the mystery bag. What we have here, replete with a stupendously long cord, which I had to make a couple of repairs to. Part 1, elephant snot soldering the metal-to-metal connection on the jumper leads. Part 2, putting some tape around the screw connectors which join the 2 forms of wiring together. So that's the first look inside. And apparently back in 1980, this was somebody's attempt at making a cheap 12 volt air compressor for automotive use. Now, one of the first things that I had to seriously take on is the fact that this, well, it turns out to be a valve assembly on top of the cylinder head, it had been cracked and broken off straight across there between where this brass fitting, which turns out to be an access port to get low pressure air, and it's sealed with an O-ring. It had broken off, and as you can see, I particularly enjoy the challenge of repairing high stress plastic parts using epoxy, and in this case nylon twine. So the procedure was to first epoxy the two pieces together, and then following that do a sort of a ball of string wrap with the twine, and then put another coat of epoxy over the top of it. So I got that far, and I confidently expected that this was going to actually work. However, when given an opportunity to perform, the motor goes. You can get some air out the end of it, but the salient feature is a constant air leaking noise coming from the cylinder end. And so I had to pull it to pieces a bit further than that. And that's when I noticed that all the screws have well-worn heads. So several people have tried several times to fix this before I got to it. Okay, so this may be a bit of a sidetrack, but just as a design curiosity, you'll notice that this electric motor is twice the size of this electric motor. This is a 10-to-1 reduction drive to the crankshaft, and I couldn't see any gearbox in this setup with the massive great big cylinder and great big motor, so I assumed it was just a clunky connection there. How wrong that was. And once again, somebody had been here and had a look inside well before me. That, voila, this thing has epicyclic gears. It's an epicyclic reduction gearbox. Can you imagine any more complicated and expensive way to do what is otherwise a really, really simple job than going from an ordinary gearbox to an epicyclic gearbox in what's supposed to be a cheap little 12-volt air compressor to keep in the boot of your car. There's nothing actually wrong with doing it that way, it's just very expensive. And in fact, the only reason I'm bothering to go ahead with trying to repair it and fix this thing is because it's got epicyclic gears, and it's the only epicyclic gearbox that I happen to own. So the next thing to do is have a look and see what's going on in there. And here we see the nature of the problem. What you're looking at is a white O-ring and a spring, and underneath that there's a little ball bearing. And my theory is that over the years that little white O-ring has slightly shrunk, and when it's shrunk the whole thing has begun to leak, because inside the O-ring is a pressure vessel and outside the O-ring is the outside air, and that's the only seal. It's a gasket on a pressure vessel. And when that happens, somebody has pulled it to pieces to try and see what's going on. And when they've put it back together, they have slightly misassembled it. Now, there I'm showing you the other side of the O-ring, and don't know whether it's showing up on camera, but with the naked eye I can see that it's been pushed out of shape. It hasn't quite been properly assembled. So the big trick today is going to be applying about $1.50's worth of assorted O-rings to the problem and see if I can re-gasket this thing, and then manage to assemble the bloody thing so that it'll work. Right, so whereas that one's slightly too small, that one fits in the groove. Right, so in theory might even be problem solved. Okay, so we'll put that to the test. Alright, it runs. Funny noise seems to be from the gears, and I'm able to put the motor under load. Okay, so what I'm going to do is measure the current it's drawing, both running free and when I've got my finger over the end of it. .85, 2.9 amps. .7, 3.2, 3.75. Okay, so we've got a bit of a pressure vessel there. This tyre is at 36 psi. So we'll see what happens. Right, it's under load. Doesn't sound like it's leaking. And it's pulling 3.5 amps at 12:05. We'll see what happens. After I put it in the shade for better cooling. 2 minutes later, .18, 4.2. So it's pulling more amps because it's doing more work because there's more compressed air in the tyre. That's my provisional diagnosis. Okay, 5 minutes. Still 4.6, 4.67, 4.7. Cylinder's hot to the touch. Motor's pretty warm. Cord's pretty cool.